for all the topics that we care about. We have a stellar panel today. I will let them introduce themselves, but we have Saleha from Dasra, we have Sandeep ji from 17,000 Foundation, Poonam from A.T.E. Chandra Foundation, and Namrata from Quest Alliance. They'll introduce themselves as we go around the table. But just to sort of set a little bit more context on unrestricted grants and what we're here to talk about, I think in the sector, according to surveys that at least I've read about, only about 15 to 20% of the funding that's available right now is unrestricted. Most of us are aware of the grant budgeting cycles and the grant writing cycles. That's the bigger crux of the money that's around. But as we've all lived through a pandemic in the last few years, we've realized, and it's really come to the fore, how important unrestricted money or money that helps an organization grow and sustain itself is. Reserves, investing in the team, capacity building, these are all really, really important for nonprofits to deliver what they set out to do. And we're doing them a disservice if we don't account for that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll unpack some questions about what are the challenges in the sector. We'll talk about what are examples from both the donor side as well as from the real organizations doing real work on the ground. So with that, I think we'll jump right in. And I think we'll start with our nonprofits and the folks who are actually doing the hard work of fundraising. So maybe Namrata, I'll come to you first. And all of you, please introduce yourself before we jump in. So the first question really is, can you tell us about, in your own experience, both as a donor or as an organization raising funds, what are the challenges on the ground, right? What restricts the availability? What do you see as challenges? Why is this not already happening if it's so obvious?
Thanks, Krisha. Can you all hear me okay? Yes. Okay. My name is Namrata. I lead partnerships for Quest, but as like all non-profits, I also do a bit of finance, bit of leadership, bit of strategy, bit of multiple other things, right? We are a non-profit. We work in about 10 states across the country. A large part of our work is in education and government schools. We also work in the skilling ecosystem, where a lot of our work is centered around 21st century skills, helping young people build skills that are necessary to thrive in an ever-changing world. So that's the kind of work we do. I think a little bit, a personal background about myself to give context to what I will say next is, I've spent about 15 years in the corporate, doing sales, client solutions, all of these things, and I've spent about 7 years in the sector. I also joined the sector long back, and I left the sector because I wasn't getting paid enough, right? It was just not possible to sustain. And I came back when I was able to sustain at whatever salary I'm getting. And from that lens, I think the perspective is different. And to answer your question of why is it not happening already, I think there's a legacy issue, right? And the issue is both from the side of nonprofits, because I don't want to say that we are victims, but it's both from the side of nonprofits and from funders. From the side of nonprofits, I see a lot of us have looked at funding traditionally as something that's needed on the ground. We've not had an organization building lens. So even today, when we are submitting, say, budgets to funders, how many of us put some costs in saying, I need to build capacity of my own team, right? As Quest, we put things like teachers capacity building, headmasters, leaders, but we don't put capacity building of our own team. We assume that will come from somewhere, someone will pay for it, right? But are we starting to do that? We have started to do that. Sometimes we get a pushback saying, this is your cost, you need to figure out. But then that also opens a channel for communication saying, why is this my cost and where do I pay from it? If I need to build capacities of my team going on the field for a project that you're supporting, you need to support the cost as well. So at least a conversation happens. Sometimes people agree, sometimes people don't. So I think one is just how we have positioned this idea of direct costs, indirect costs. So we also all have a responsibility to change that narrative. And I think the second thing is the other side, right? Coming from a for-profit world where I've also done sales and raised money, the idea of an organization is the same irrespective of the sector. The fact that organizations need human resources, learning and development teams, marketing teams, analytics teams, knowledge management teams, tech teams, these are fundraising teams, sales teams. These are not a question that anybody asks in any other sector. You will not see anyone asking a company, why do you have an L&D team? It is understood that you need an L&D team, right? So for me, it is a little dystopian when people ask non-profits saying, "Aapko kyun chahiye?" an organization is an organization. An organization needs to be built. And these are fundamental pillars of building any organization. And a non-profit organization is no different. So I think these are legacy issues at both sides, at how we've looked at our work and pitched our work, and also now when funders look at our work. So there's this question of, but why do you guys need marketing and communications? You know? So like I find it sometimes weird that I get asked that question, because in the for-profit sector I was never asked that. And nobody asked me a hisab saying, tell me what you do, show me where every money is spent, right? You give me money to do my work and I will do that work and I'm accountable. Like Krisha said, it's not free money. Accountability is non-negotiable. But what are you holding me accountable for is, I think, a fundamental shift that we need to make. But some of these I feel are also legacy issues.
Thanks, Namrata. Thanks for being so honest. I think these are things we also don't talk about sometimes. But I'm going to come for more of this to you, Sandeep. So, you want to talk about, you work in a very difficult region and you've done this for many, many years. What are the challenges you're seeing from your vantage point? Why is this not happening?
Okay, hi everybody. So very briefly about myself, I'm Sahu, 17,000 Feet Foundation. We started 11 years ago as an organization, but the genesis is much older. It's been 40 years since I've been trekking in the Himalayas, and the one thing which I've been watching is the fact that the border villages of our country in the Himalayas are getting emptier and emptier. There is a huge amount of, rural flight, I think is the technical term, which makes our borders quite unsafe. And as of today, I have seen villages in Uttarakhand, in Himachal, in Sikkim, and Ladakh, where the population of a border village would be either below 4 or above 60. So it's an unfortunate system. And one of the reasons we saw was lack of confidence of the parents, of young parents, in the government school of their village. So that has been the objective of 17,000 Feet, is transforming our frontier villages. So we work across the Indian Himalayan region. We work in most border schools of the country in the Himalayas. We currently are supporting or working directly in 400 schools. And I'm ex-advertising and a lovely career, but no regrets leaving it. Trekking has always been my passion, and hence the mountains. So, as I think one of the biggest reasons has already been mentioned here, the very unique challenge which we face due to lack of non-program funding or unrestricted funding is that it actually discourages efficiency. I have a line item. I'll give you an example. Say I have a line item which I have proposed to my funder, says transport cost, say 5,000 rupees per school. Now my field team can negotiate it down to 3,000 because of a particular circumstance or a situation, but they're not allowed to. So I have to spend more. I'm forced to spend more for something I can do cheaper. And I am not allowed to shift that saving into something unrestricted. I'm not allowed to do something much more productive with that, but I'm forced to spend that money. So that's one very unique challenge we face. I'm not allowed to be efficient. And of course, that is mostly because of the inflexibility of our budgeting system. So if I have transport, I have to spend on transport. And if I don't, I have to give that money back, and that's another problem. And I'm talking mostly about CSR funds. So these are the things which I find very different from the normal commercial world. This is a problem which I think is untenable. No organization can work without savings, without efficiency, and without space for growth. And I feel that it is now a time to change. Having said all that, we've been very lucky with our funders. I hope some of them are here. So nothing personal, but yes, this is something we need to look at. And maybe bring in flexibility in funding, maybe give directly unrestricted funds or something. We need to look at these things.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, before we go to the donors, just a quick show of hands. How many in this room are actual grant-making organizations? How many representatives from grant-making organizations? Okay, that's telling.
I can just say in the past, because I just left that role.
Okay. How many actually are grant appliers or grant receiving in this room? There you go. And okay, one last poll. How many in this room have actually received an unrestricted grant? So that's not bad actually. And on that note, I'll go to the donors. And maybe I'll come to you, Saleha, because from the donor side, what are the challenges? See, and you know the audience now.
So we are at this beautifully painful position of being both, right? As you understand, Dasra is an intermediary non-profit, so we are funders in some capacity, but we are also non-profits. And I can relate to everything that you all say is because I'm a fundraiser within Dasra, right? So I'm hoping that we can share some of these perspectives. So just very quickly on the background, Dasra is doing a whole lot of different things, specifically from the perspective of the work that I'm doing and the conversation we're having today, right? I'm part of the Rebuild India Fund, which basically focuses on extremely small grassroots organizations that are working with leaders who are from the communities that they are serving, right? So actually like the most marginalized, most vulnerable communities with very small organizational budgets, working in the remotest of geographies, who typically won't have access to a room like this, who won't have access to conversations like this, but are doing phenomenal work, right? Some of this got highlighted during the pandemic, right? We all realized, right, who was at the forefront and who was serving the needs of the communities were these amazing leaders. And I think Rebuild India Fund came from some of these observations. I mean, we knew this reality always existed. It's not something that we realized, but I think it was in everybody's face. So, on that note, the segue into this conversation of unrestricted funding, what are the challenges? I think, right, if we were to very honestly call it out, it's the power dynamic, right? Because we've always walked into conversations that funders are giving money, NGOs are receiving money. So the minute we start from like giving, receiving conversation, power dynamic becomes the biggest barrier to unrestricted funding. And I think it's time, right? Everything that we've seen, our lives before the pandemic were different, and our lives after the pandemic are different. We need to start talking about these more openly and addressing and challenging it. So I think the pendulum is skewed so much on the other side, now it slowly starts shifting, right? When we come in the middle where we say, let's walk in as equal partners. So like even earlier, like Namrata mentioned, right? Like how can the conversation happen on both sides, right? Because if the problem exists, solutioning needs to come from both ends. So while we have to challenge the norms and funders need to reflect and we need to talk about like you're walking in, you're contributing, but let's also as non-profit leaders, right, organizations, how do we walk in to be like, we're not asking. We are knowledge providers. We are experts. We know our space, we know our field, so walking in as equals, right? So I think it's also time for us to start claiming that space, to be able to say, and if imagine everybody who's sitting here and we go out and tell everybody to say the same thing, if more funders start listening to the same conversation, then you're forced to act also that way. So I think onus on both ends, and maybe we start the change there, where we start asking for more unrestricted funding, right? And explaining, like, all the other examples that have come up, right? What it means, how we're doing it. Unrestricted funding in no way means that there is no accountability, right? Everybody wants to report back, show impact, but it's about giving the freedom and the space. And that's, I think, again, working, because at Dasra, we had funders who gave us unrestricted funding and trusted that, okay, go ahead, innovate. We had the ability and the space to then offer that same back to our NGO partners who are then able to execute and do, because they know what's best needed, right? How can I sit in Bombay and decide what is needed in Sonmarg in Jammu and Kashmir? Like, I just cannot. So I think just addressing some of that. And very specifically from a CSR aspect, right? Many times what I hear is the laws do not permit that. I think we need to stop saying some of these things, even us as a group, right? But CSR cannot give. CSR can give, right? And it's so much about the interpretation of the law. I'm really spending time to understand this space. Most all of us maybe should, and we have more dialogues like these to be like, it's not what the law is limiting us to do. It is what we are limiting ourselves to do. And again, it comes from, again, partnership where we start talking about some of these challenges to be like, this can be done. How do we enable it? How do we invest in doing this more? I mean, I can go on. I'll pause. So yeah, thanks. Over to you.
Hi everybody, can you all hear me? Good afternoon. Very nice and pleasant to be here as a part of this very important conversation in a CSR forum. I feel like that in itself is a great step in the right direction, that we're not speaking in the other conferences and in the CSR conference about unrestricted funding. So I feel like that's a good start to have a conversation. I'm Poonam Choksi. I work with A.T.E Chandra Foundation. I head the social sector capacity building. Because we love acronyms and big names, in the sector. So SSCB vertical, which focuses on building the capacity of leaders in the sector, leaders like all of you sitting here, to help, grow your organizations, invest in organization building, and also looking at what are the white spaces in the ecosystem as a sector, what are the challenges that we collectively face, and how can we invest in some of that. So but my personal journey in the sector started 10 years ago, almost a decade now. I'll finish. I started with a startup, but before that 5 years of corporate stint. But I started with a startup. So I've been on the delivery side of things, like all of you, have been on the ground, seen the impact firsthand, driven the impact firsthand, moved to an incubator organization, which was an enabling organization to the social startups, and then now to the donor side of things. So I think I've worn all three hats of doer, enabler, and a funder. So I think has had a very, privilege and opportunity to have very rich experience in the sector. What I would really like to share is connecting all the dots, what my co-panelists speak about, that challenge of unrestricted funding. I think you've heard, but what are the consequences of it, right? What happens when we did a survey, when I was working at an incubating organization, reached out to about 100 alumni organizations and understood what happened to these organizations after we've incubated them, both for-profits, not-for-profits, and how many have been able to scale. And scale doesn't necessarily mean only growing your budget or your beneficiaries, but really, having to influence systems, policy, become think tanks, or become, thought leaders in the sector. So we said, who are these, people, and how many have been able to achieve that? Any guesses what would that number be? 100% you think have been able to achieve or not achieve? 25%. So that's very generous and very aspirational. We would love that, right? I think what we saw is most of the organized 70 to 80% were just surviving, right? Operationally surviving, not being able to grow further after the incubation support stops. Around 20% of them are, marginally growing, right? At a 5 to 10% growth rate year on year, trying to build, blocks by blocks. And then less than 1% have actually built the resilience, to take all kind of shocks, financial, social, environmental, and that you can extrapolate to the sector, right? You can see in the sector how many NPOs can claim that we can survive all the shocks. Nobody. And what differentiates this journey from, having to move, and if you see the startup world, there is so much of a great launchpad given to organizations, there's a lot of flexibility. Because when I was working at an incubator, I saw that organizations were given funds for purpose. What are you solving for was a question. And now the conversation, when you become an institution, and trying to build an institution and institutionalize processes, you ask, what is your project? So that whole narrative shifted from, purpose to project, which needs to again move back to purpose. So very, very important to really, so, my point is about, from incubation to institutionalization, there's a big gap, and how do we really, solve for that is a big, I see a disabler, and what are the differentiators is organizations have been able to build that resilience, have actually invested in organization building, and building systems, processes, investing in fundraising, M&E, HR, and I've seen them really thrive, right? So one of the big differentiators from those organizations who are just surviving to thriving, investing in organization, the second differentiator is the founder mindset. We really operate out of scarcity mindset because we're always chasing, funds, and we're always chasing, and I think it doesn't stop and it will not stop. And I think that's the reality of working in the social sector, that
we want to get there. But I think what I want to say that you can be more entrepreneurial throughout. I think we cannot afford to stop being innovative as a fundraiser or fund giver, at any point and be complacent about how we give and what we give. I think both narrative, like, my co-panelist here, Namrata shared, right? Legacy, we need to break that and come out of that. I can speak more, but I have one more point, I want to make that, and what will bring about that change, I think there's a very problematic perception in the sector, and people look at us because we talk about capacity building very loud and clear in many forums, and they come to us that we need CB funding. हमको fundraising के लिए पैसा दो, हमको M&A के लिए पैसा दो. We have to change that and say that every donor is a program plus donor. So we cannot have only program proponents anymore. We need institution builders, and that narrative, of compartmentalizing donors also has to change. So the moment people come to me and I said, have you made an ask to your existing donors, and to how many and to what extent? I don't get those answers, right? So it's not about saying that, oh, I'll go to, and because there are only 5 CB donors in the sector, I can count on them on my fingers, not more than 10. And how many sector NGOs we have? Any numbers? I mean, GuideStar says that 2.5 lakh NGOs have filed their return, in last year, and Darpan says I don't know in millions, right? But even if I have to say, realistically 2.5 lakh NGOs, 10 funders are not able to cater to that. So the shift has to come from both ends to say that we as NGOs also will have to make a noise, build a movement to not compartmentalize budgets and donors. With that, I will hand over back to Krisha.
Thank you, Poonam. I think I resonate with all of that. I've been a social entrepreneur myself. I've run a non-profit. I've shut down a non-profit because I couldn't fundraise anymore. And now on this side, we also fundraise. We work with social entrepreneurs, startups, doing tech-based work at the last mile. And this mindset that you're talking about, right? Startup founders always in fear. The next cycle, the next set of salaries. And recently, when the McKinsey Scott grants were given out, there was a survey that said that a majority of the recipients of that grant said during COVID, because those grants came, it just helped them lift out of that fear for a bit, and that was so liberating. Which brings me to the second part of this panel, right? There are green shoots. There is lots happening, definitely. It's not all dark and bleak. I think there's great examples. There's the Grow Fund that A.T.E Give has. There is Rebuild that Saleha talked about. There's also the Revive Fund that got started during COVID by the great team at. There's the Revive Fund as well. But yes, there are these great examples. Samhita, thank you. Samhita and the team are doing an awesome job. But yes, there are great examples. So, can we talk about? Can we talk about what these green shoots are? What is working? Where are you seeing the green shoots? What are the learnings from all of this? And maybe unpack for us a little bit real life examples, because we have so many grant recipients in the room. If you can unpack for us, what will really unleash the potential for unrestricted grants? I think I'll start with you, Saleha, this time first.
So I think for me, everything when I talk about this centers around that power dynamic conversation, right? While there are multiple aspects to it, it constantly leads back to that. And again, like I said, because we're at this place where we've received unrestricted funding, and then we're able to obviously take that forward to the non-profits, right? So I think the fear of not asking, right? One of our non-profit leaders was like, we were doing this workshop, we prepped everybody, we were like, listen, walk into the room, you're not fundraising, you're not asking for money, you're a knowledge provider, just tell the funders what you do, give them an understanding of the thematic area. Don't go into program details. Like, we spent time doing that. We walked in that gathering. It's also about the language, right? Like, these are the NGO leaders and the non-NGO leaders. So efforts need to be made from all ends. We did that, and then later when we were sitting and reflecting, and the NGO leader works in Bundelkhand, Uttar Pradesh, is a domestic violence survivor. Herself works with women who are domestic violence survivors, fights administration, law, all of it, is telling me that for the first time in my life, I walked into a room and came out without feeling scared of funders. That shook me to the core, right? This is very, like, why? Why should a woman who's done all of the amazing things that she's been doing scared of funders? So I think think to me, that is what drives me and that powers me to be like. So then it's like, okay, let's walk into the room not fearing the funder and be like, we have enough, right? We have these amazing organizations, do phenomenal work, I want to talk about that. So the minute you walk in with that energy and be like, ask, we were able to, and obviously we have privilege. Dasra has been around, right? Whatever I'm doing is also legacy knowledge that I get and the power that I get from there to full. So I'm not delusional when I'm saying this. So having that conversation, we were able to get this and then we were able to do this. What is Rebuild India Fund? It's a $50 million fund. We are providing flexible, unrestricted, long-term funding. Now imagine as an NGO leader, someone's telling you, you will get 10 lakhs every year, promise you for the next 5 years you will get this money, you don't need to give a proposal, you don't need to give complicated reporting formats, okay? They don't know what to do. They keep asking us, are you sure? But you will ask me later. Like, we're not, okay? And some examples on that, right? Like, what did they do? Unrestricted funding doesn't only mean one particular thing, right? Like OD Karo. We literally said, do what you want. You know what's best. You know what are the gaps, use it how you want. And then we started hearing, right? We don't have aggregate data already. We've just started, it's been a year, little over a year. Powerful stories like, we took this money and we were actually able to do mental health for our entire staff because the work we do is very difficult. We come back and there is no way to decompress. So they were able to get counseling and all for their team. They actually went on a org retreat. They organized picnics. If for-profits can do it, why can't non-profits do it, right? Then in other cases, there were so many of our partners were able to hire back all of the staff that they let go due to the pandemic, right? And there are many such stories, right? Another one, right? Which is programmatic, if you were to really say. They work with prostituted women and nobody wants to pay for the stipend. Now they were like, it's very simple. If I want that woman to sit in this room and get livelihoods training, she's not going to sit. She has to pay rent, she has to feed her child, and she has to run a house. She's not going to do that with no money in her hand. So they literally need to pay stipend. With this fund, which none of their funders were giving, they were able to give the stipend, tell them, come, and their retention rates increase. So I'm saying there are so many such examples, right? That is the power of unrestricted funding. Let the organization do what they want. Sorry, I pause.
I'm also going to restrict and request everyone to put their phones on silent if possible, please. Thank you. I'll go to you, Sandeep sir, next. If you want to talk about your experiences with receiving unrestricted grants, what has worked well? Where are the green shoots?
A lot of personal funding has come in, individual funding has come in as unrestricted, but because they are individual, they're not very large in volume. If I look at two very, very important or landmark kind of unrestricted or non-programmatic funding which we received, one of them was from, thank you. This was 3 years ago, and it was we used that to train our senior management. We used the funds which we got from A.T.E foundation was to train our senior management to raise funds better, and it was amazing. I mean, in 1 year, we actually increased our funding almost 7 times. And we did this with Atma, with funds from A.T.E Chandra, and within 1 year, it was. Our fundraising team was actually, as I said, was demanding money from our the funders. It was it was very nice, and that I think was one landmark. The other one was, as she was saying, Grow Fund. That was amazing. I mean, we actually did a retreat. So that was nice, and we also managed to develop our own MIS, which makes my reporting from my field almost real time. We know what is happening in all the 3 states we are working today, in all the 400 schools we are working today. We know in real time which team has gone where. And this MIS was very tricky because we've been trying for a long time, we never had funds, but we went to Grow Funds. Helped us do this MIS in an offline scenario where there is no internet, because that is mostly the places we work in. It took us a year, but today we are much much better prepared for scaling, for efficiency, and we couldn't have done it without these kind of funds. Thank you. Again.
Okay, because I love data, I'm going to give some more data to all of you. So there was a study conducted by the Bridgespan group. Everybody must be aware of. They've been doing a lot of studies. So we are funding one of the initiatives which is called Pay What It Takes, which is exactly telling you pay what it takes. And this is to the donor community loud and clear, to build organizations and to help them become sustainable and scalable, in their initiatives. But they recently conducted last year a study which actually went around asking donors, what is your perception about giving to unrestricted funds? More importantly, for the organization development, funds. And they also did the same exercise with NGOs. Interestingly, I think around 50% of the NGOs said that whenever we made the ask for an organization development fund, we've always been rejected. What was the donor perspective? Any guesses on that?
80% says it was.
The donors, 47% of the donors who were surveyed said that we never got the clear ask from the NGOs. And I think one can say that we made and they've never given, but maybe if we have to step back and reflect on this and say what can we learn from this, that, again, because we are so project driven and not purpose driven, this stops the conversation at the project and output and activity level. And I think one of the enablers for organizations, in the development space is to really say, and moving beyond how we are very thorough and rigorous with our project outcomes, I think if we can step back and look at your organizational building outcomes, what, Sahu said here, the fundraising went 7x. Can you also look at your own ability to invest in HR, M&E, fundraising, and what outcomes you want to achieve as an organization? Can you clearly articulate that so that there is a plan, there is an understanding, there is an assessment to begin with, that you've evaluated your organization non-programmatic functions to begin with, see what the weakest spots are, say here is where I need an investment, and in the next 3 years I would want to go from a 5 crore to a 10 crore or a 15 crore, and here is why I need to invest in fundraising. I think if we make that ask clear, I'm sure there is going to be a conversation, if not funding. The doors to listening will open, if not to grants. But I feel like that's where a big enabler for NGOs to really do. And one of the examples that I would like to share here, when Give India is one of our partners, we funded them very early on, Give India platform, which provides retail donations to NGOs, and they came to us with the outcome proposition that we are a tech-based platform and we need to invest in technology. Very obvious, very logical. But sometimes to donors it sounds very illogical, So they said, but they came up with a 3 or 5 year plan and said that currently we are raising, in the early 2010s, they were raising how much money on their platform, any guesses? I love this guess game, just because it really hits you hard. They were raising around 20 crores, through the retail giving. And then COVID hit, of course, and they invested a lot in technology. So some of the big donors wrote unrestricted checks to build their tech platform, build systems, processes, everything that is compliance due diligence, because they needed those hardcore, rigorous processes, because to build trust with the retail donors is extremely difficult. So they thought that, if you don't invest, we'll never be able to scale and succeed. And now currently today in the COVID year, how much money do you think Give India raised? Because they had this enabling, platform which had a very strong technology, tools, systems and processes. 1,000 crores. 500 crores is of course outlier COVID year, relief funds, but if you remove that, still 500. So they are at 500, 600 crores now, stabilizing and growing. But from 20 crores to 500 crores, just because they got unrestricted grants and invested with a plan which convinced all the donors. There was no saying no. It would be illogical, if you would sound foolish if you could, debate that plan with them. They had a thorough plan of saying what and why and how and where we will reach in the 5 years. I feel like that commitment and clarity to what you want to do at an organization level is very, very important and enabling and break the power dynamics and get into the doors. So yeah, that was one success story I thought would be good to share.
So I think just tying in all the end. One, I think what Poonam was saying, that this idea of these are the OD donors, unrestricted donors, and these are the program donors. I think we really need to break that boundary, right? Because there are only so many donors today in India that are giving unrestricted fund. Grow Fund, Revive, Rebuild, Azim Premji Philanthropic Initiative, Rohini Nilikini. These are the some, right? And then there are international foundations which many of us can't access because we don't have FCRA. So if we keep relying on these 5, we can hope the 5 will grow to 10 or 15. But the cycle will never break. We will always have enough non-profits struggling for survival. So, I'm talking as an organization that still raises about 75-80% of our funds from CSRs, right? But what we will need to do to rethink is how are we actually asking CSRs, right? What are we asking money for? We've been fortunate to have some very, very good funders with us. We started building a tech platform in 2014 with Accenture, right? Just because we did a research and we said the future is going to be mobile based, right? And that time, like, it was unheard of, especially in the social sector. The fact that they helped us invest in a platform in 2014 when COVID hit, our platform was up and running, and we were actually struggling to take it into schools and skilling institutions because people were like, बच्चों को phone नहीं देना है, it's not good. But we were at 20,000 learners on the platform, and we went to 100,000 learners. And a lot of non-profits came to us and said, hey, you guys have a platform, can you help us? Because tech in the sector was not very prominent back then. And we said, yes, happy to. It is a digital public good, free for everyone to use, because someone else was funding it, right? So I think the idea of, and my invitation to all of you is, please relook at what you are asking. Please ask. The worst that will happen is someone will say no, right? And please be ready to accept no. No's is a part of life. We still hear no's, despite being in a position of so-called privilege, if I may ask. But my real invitation, because we also get told by funders saying, "आप लोग ये सब मांग रहे हो, बाकी non-profits are not asking us." So that's the vicious cycle that all of us need to collectively break out of. If all of us can ask.
Sorry, just very important point, very important. Why I'm saying, and she rightly said, and I think there will be some who will be privileged, NGOs, who will have a partnership of equity with donors because they've built those relationships over years, and those stalwart organizations need to lead this conversation front end for the others who are following the path. So I would not expect a grassroots, NGOs who don't have that voice till we build the power dynamics and get there. I think who are the ones who can lead, and you should identify amongst yourself that you already have the vantage point to have that conversation. If you can't, then how will others? And I have pushed a lot of my NGOs to have that, and they've got funding from CSR for some of their, from 5% they pushed to 7 to 8 to 10 to 12 to 15. Yeah. Some of them have got there because they had that vantage point because CSRs were dependent on them. The moment you know that they are also equally dependent on, getting their funds, utilized because of the cause area, and they know you're doing good job, you already have a voice and, foot in the door. So I think use that vantage point to have those, conversation of partnerships of equals. So I just wanted to make sure that identify and, use your, to your advantage, and so you can create the path for the others.
I think just wanted to say that we walked that journey. We used to be at 5% overhead, then we pushed for 8, then we pushed for 10. Today we are pushing for 15. Not everybody agrees. We still have people who come and say, "Lekin hum to 5% hi denge," right? But it opens a conversation of why should you give 15, right? Maybe that person won't fund us, and that has happened. It still happens. But I think the idea for all of us is to ask, and we are happy to kind of the charge, not saying we are in that position. But I think we also get a pushback saying, "But there are other people who are not asking, so why are you asking?" Right? So I think that is one. Second, I think just a minute more. In terms of, just a minute. In terms of asking, I think also how do we structure our ask? What you were saying. We did a survey with all our funders last year saying, tell us our strengths, areas of improvement. And one point that came out from all our funders was that you guys talk a lot about your programs and projects, but we'd like to know more about what you want to do as an organization. Who are you as an organization? And we thought we were doing very well on that, but we still got this feedback. And we've been very fortunate to get the McKinsey Scout grant earlier this year, but when we were putting the proposal for that, it was a bit of a struggle, saying that basically it asked us for a 5-year projections and deficits and what is our plans for 5 years, not from a program lens, but from an organization lens. So it had everything. It had from resilience to leadership building, to culture building, to impact growth, to systems and processes, and it was not easy, I would say, to put that proposal together for us, not because there was a requirement from the other side, but because we had not thought about it like that. But when we did, it became easier for us to do things like that. So I think there's also a lot of capacity building that's happening in the sector, so please make use of these spaces and figure out how to structure your ask as well. I think that's what it is.
We've been complaining a lot, all four of us. But I think even non-profits need to be innovative about unrestricted funding. They need, maybe if it's a possibility, they should look at their own revenue streams. It is important for non-profits not to just depend on donations, funds, or anything. You need to be self-sufficient. I personally strongly believe that every non-profit should have some kind of its own revenue stream. Like 17,000 feet has volunteerism. We send people to our remote schools to volunteer, and we expect a donation against that. And it has been a it's an award-winning project which we do. So I would, if there are non-profits in this room, please look around, see where you can make money without a funder. Be very clear about it. This money is not going into anybody's pocket, it is going into an organization which will help it to grow. So please look at that as a possibility.
Thank you. I think that's an amazing point. And I think another trend is now outcomes-linked grants, performance-linked grants. Everybody talks about impact bonds, but I think there's a lot of organizations doing great work on helping non-profits become ready to take performance-linked grants. I can think of Arma, Sandeep mentioned, they are doing some great work. There are others like Registration Trust is another one that I know of. But I think as a non-profit, and I'm looking at the questions and that's why I'm making this point, is also move the conversation towards outcomes. If you want to shift the conversation from budget line items and move it to outcomes, I think that's perhaps the best way. It helps organizations. Somebody's made a question here, what are the options for an early stage non-profit or an early stage social entrepreneur? It definitely helps if you have track record in the space, but shift the conversation, just summarizing what everybody said, ask for it, shift the conversation to outcomes, shift the conversation to org building, and shift the conversation to the outcomes from the sector that we all want, right? I think that's sort of the sum total of that. But I'm going to move to questions, and I'm sorry, we only have 5 minutes. So I'm going to try and club a few of these and get a few voices in. I think this one is very interesting. What level of flexibility, I'm trying to club to, but what's the level of flexibility you have if you have raised unrestricted funds? Who do you want to talk about this? What is the level of flexibility you have as a grantee once you've raised unrestricted funds? And what's the typical, how does an unrestricted grant actually work? Just give an example.
Do what you like. I don't know, so I would like to actually understand this question better. What will unrestricted grant do is, see, if you really so we don't do very unrestricted grants, okay? We are also, for us it's outcomes. So if you 17,000 feet came with a problem statement and said that, listen, fundraising is a deficit, we don't know how, we're struggling. We said, okay, so tell us a plan. I mean, we'll help you also give a plan or get a partner who can help you with the plan. That you need to be clear what you want to achieve with that. That is very important. And then you set milestones, and then if it doesn't work, we have to have a conversation. But I think clarity of if you just talk about input, give me a fundraiser, then we don't talk. I mean, we are like, what do you do with the fundraiser? What do you do with an M&E person? If you don't have a plan. And what is the weakest link in the organization is very important to identify. So I think we help organizations to structure their challenges in a way that can help them, make a better ask. So I think not every donor will be able to do that. I wish they can also reach out where the NGOs struggle. But I think that's where, onus will be on all of you, which is why Brisbane has come up with a lot of toolkits. You should definitely look up, they have an OD assessment toolkit on their website, which looks at 11 domains of an organization building. And that's a great way to start and look at your organization, different areas, and then understand what you want to achieve, which is your weakest link, and make an ask. And use your grants towards that. I don't know if that answers the question, but...
Who's that organization you just mentioned?
Bridgespan.
The
Bridgespan.
The bridge.
I've been told we have only 2 minutes, so I'm going to just take one last question. For-profit organizations, what kind of social entrepreneurs, but who are for-profit organizations, what kind of unrestricted grant options exist? The answer is many. But if anybody from the panel who wants to take this,
Not the right. Not the right. No, we work with non-profits.
I can try and answer this since I've ignited this fire. No, but for-profit organizations, definitely, I think a lot of grant-giving organizations work with them as, vendors. Right? That is one way. I think there are also now funds which are setting up, which are pre-seed funds, right? Once you reach a for-profit at a certain scale, then you become eligible for seed funding, angel funding, and so on. At A.T.E, we work with social entrepreneurs who are for-profit entrepreneurs. There's nothing wrong in being financially viable. Profit is not a dirty word. You need it to succeed, and that's absolutely fine. That's what we tell all our founders. If you are sustainable, you will do good. If your team is happy, you will do good. So yes, there are funds who work with for-profit entrepreneurs. I think we're out of time.
We have 5 minutes.
Okay.
More questions.
Krisha. Sorry, on the flexibility bit, if I have to jump in. So we do, right? We try to do unrestricted funds with the angle of flexibility. So I think on that question is, I think having conversations maybe at the onset, what I may say may not be relatable to most, right? Within Rebuild, we don't, we are encouraging people to not have that conversation, to be like, you can talk to us, tell us what you intend to use it for. We will have conversations again, you may change your mind, you may do something differently. So we offer that space. Again, when I'm saying that, I know that this is not how typically all conversations happen. But I think I'm hoping that, right, with that movement that we're trying to build, that we bring in 100 every year, 500 over the next 5 years, if all of us start saying the same thing and everybody in this room starts saying the same thing, some change will come, right? With so many different things that we've changed in the sector, we're hoping that more and more have some of these conversations. In fact, a lot of our non-profit partners were able to give the example of Rebuild India Fund and get unrestricted flexible funding. And they've given us, right? That's another success story. I ran out of time, so I couldn't say that. But I think it is that. Maybe we start, few of us will do it. We have the space to be able to push our funders to do it. But I think conversations, right? The power of why this will help. Giving some of that success story, building that conversation is not going to happen over one conversation. We've been also doing this. The funder who's given us this kind of insane capital to go ahead and do this audacious program is a relationship we've had for over 10, 15 years. So it's cultivating that relationship to get there. Like she rightly said, more and more people we need to build to be able to do that. So I know we've all asked non-profits to do a lot of things. As a fundraiser, if I don't ask the very few funders who are in this room, please start rethinking how you're giving funds, right? Please start rethinking, is it just a checkbox that I need to give this grant and I'm done and I do my compliance reporting? Or is it about the impact that you can unlock with the funds that you're channeling to the sector? So I think my ask would be that also.
So I think we do have time for one more question. Given that most of the non-profits in India are actually a large cohort of very small or medium-sized NGOs, that's the bulk of, I'm assuming I get your question right. What can happen at scale to help move the conversation forward? How can you change systems?
I think that bit was covered pretty well. I think we need to talk more to our funders. We need to ask them directly. I think we should not shy away from asking for money.
It's a systems question also. If you want to add anything from a
that's my question. Having worked on the donor side, I'm giving unrestricted funds, but that's through foreign funding, so it doesn't apply. What I hear from the CSRs whom I facilitate my day-to-day work with nowadays is we can't do it. So I think there are no legislations I have studied. I'm not a law student, but this is a conversation which needs to be changed around in the CSR world. It has to be led by not the small NGOs, but somebody like ACT. That was my question. if you have to change the structure of the conversation. Because I have sat in those conversations where people, NGOs have come back to us and said, can we do a line change item? Can you move this money from here? It is absolutely okay to do that because it has been done in the past and earlier, I think.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we got your question just in the interest of time
here. I think we keep saying that we should do this collectively, but the idea is also that there is no collective body today. There is no one there is no body that's, if I may use the word, lobbying for things like that, right? Yeah. Every sector has a lobbying body. We don't have one. We do have organizations like A.T.E, Chandra, like Dasra, like Edelgive, like Samita, and there are a few others like Azim Premji, like Rohit, and some of them actually are now getting together and say we need to champion this cause, right? But I think that's the fundamental problem. We have nobody championing collectively for a cause, and individually some of us are doing, some of us are not doing, some of us can't afford to do. And I think that's the fundamental gap. So the solidarity that is there in the sector really needs to come together as maybe a unit that specifically walks the corridors that need to be walked and say, this must change, and this has to come from a position of power. So people who have that power to walk, and I'm not saying it has to be only the funders, I think it has to be all of us put together who can pull that weight and say, let's make the shift. And I do think you talked of green shoots. Some of it is happening, but maybe you can talk more.
I think the social stock exchange is one
such
effort.
There are many such actually. I wouldn't say that there is no organization, which is why we consciously, intentionally funded Pay What It Takes. I think that's a movement. It talks to the donors. It talks to NGOs, of course, enabling. But one system change that you're talking about, I feel what we didn't have earlier, and I think we are starting to have now, which I think we should start using more consciously, is data around this. I think what we didn't have, these were all anecdotal understanding and stories of how deprived and how scarred we are with this funding. How many of us know that this data exists? I talked to all my non-profits. I said, okay, tell me what is the average indirect cost of NGOs in this sector? Can anybody tell me what is an average indirect cost of NGOs, average, in the sector? Any answers? Huh? How many? 15, 25 range, right? Yeah, so that's about right. There is 19%. So there was a study again conducted by Britspan, which did an analysis of 388 NGOs, 2 years back, and they found out, and from service delivery to advocacy range, right? It ranged from 5 to 51%. Because advocacy, administration, and indirect costs are very, very high because very people-centric, profile. It's not service delivery. So the average was 19%. And tell me, what is the deficit? How much does the sector pay on an average? How many donors, what is the percentage of that, average administration cost received? Correct, right? There's a 13% point deficit, right? It's around 8 to 9%. So, but how many people have this conversation using data? That there's a research, so it's not my own. So suddenly this conversation ki iske pehle kisne kiya, tumhare baad usne nahi pucha. It's data telling me, right? It's not my personal agenda to say mere staff ke liye 15% chahiye. This is what an average, this is a sector data that's validating. So and there is many such reports that are coming. They are also building a true cost compendium, guidelines for how do you budget for true cost in your organization budget, which we don't know how to do. Because then everybody starts differentiating कि ये program है ही नहीं, leadership program में नहीं आता, ये program में नहीं आता, but everything is how do you pitch that better? We know that NGOs struggle to do this, so we are saying let's build a compendium guideline and build some capacity around. So that's the work we're doing at systems level. So I want to say that things are going to move, and we are making sure that as a foundation who's invested in capacity building, we commit to making this work for the sector. So that note.
Thank you. I think I will sum it up, and I will also say there are green shoots. I think we didn't talk about it, but the social stock exchange, wire tools like impact bonds, performance-linked, performance-linked grants, etc., are also green shoots. They will help move the conversation towards data. They will help move the conversation towards a systems-led solution for this. But yes, please, I think in summary, ask your donors, invest in your capacity. Find like-minded organizations, and we should all make this a movement. But I think also org reflection came across as a big one. I think both donors and non-profits need to reflect a little bit on what is the true cost of delivering only then we can say pay what it takes, right? And the reflection, if we can get strong data, I think data will help probably make that case. I hope that summarizes it. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for being a wonderful audience.